Beauty from the Shelf is a podcast where industry experts fill in the gaps that are integral to growth for early-stage beauty founders and brands. Today's episode covers a topic that is crucial for all brands: growth. Growth can come in a variety of forms: new SKUs, new product innovation, or new distribution or placement. To dig into this loaded topic, I'm joined by Chris Perry of First Movr. Here's a snippet from our conversation today.
Now you have to tell a new story to a different group of people with adequate funding and headcount potentially to manage it, or agencies or tools that track it or whatever. And it just becomes unruly. And that's the problem with big brands. Basically already have this massive amount of stuff they have to manage. The e-com teams often aren't big enough to manage it all easily. A lot of them are getting bigger, but they're not big enough, and they don't have the opportunity to go back from scratch and build from scratch. Whereas a new brand actually gets to start and go, hey, you know what? I added A and it caused a 20% loss. So I removed A and I added B, and then I saw a 30% gain, right? It's not perfect, but it allows you to actually building block your way to growth.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Chris. Chris is the Chief Learning Officer and co-founder of First Movr. First Movr is a satellite center of excellence for CPG e-commerce education and change management. They provide outside resources and perspectives for CPG brands. Prior to founding First Movr, Chris held a variety of roles at various CPGs. I'm so excited for you to hear our conversation today. Let's dig in. Chris, thanks again for joining the show today. I know that First Movr supports established CPGs and new brands, and your company provides frameworks around some key business functions that can really help businesses operate. Can you share some of the growth strategies that you discuss with some of your clients that help new brands in particular?
Definitely. So by nature of doing a lot of training and consulting and just connecting in the industry, sometimes it's unofficial or informal support. We actually develop a lot of frameworks and strategic lenses to help brands organize what is complex. And I think the training part really helps, because when you have to train complex things, you have to simplify it. And it actually unlocks some frameworks for growth or digital transformation or capability building. There are three in particular that I think are very relevant for both big brands, but also new brands that could be of use. And again, a lot of these are free resources that we make available, but that we can also complement later to have direct engagement with brands. But we have what we call kind of our 8 factors of change. So it's our change formula, which really is to help make change less theoretical and a lot more actionable. So there are 8 factors of change that we educate on and that we've got content on that is available free to brands to help walk through what they can kind of qualify or quantify within their organization around whatever's next. And that's definitely helpful for big brands, because a lot of times e-commerce or whatever's next is difficult to reorganize around. But for new brands, what's interesting a lot of times is they themselves are implementing the 8 factors of change. They don't actually know that though. So if you knew what the 8 factors of change were and actually held yourself accountable to them, you might do 10 times better than you're already doing as a more agile brand than the big brand. So we've got that change formula. We've got a capability map that we call the Trilliant Value Scape. And that's really to help brands understand, arguably in a perfect world, if you had to start from scratch, what tech tools and capabilities would you need in what order to deliver on an optimal tech stack or ecosystem of capabilities. And we do a lot of different angles on that, on how do you evaluate them? How do you build the right one? Which ones work together? And it's not about referring specific companies. It's just to help people understand what do you need and what's available. And the last one I'll throw out that I have a lot of heart for is what we call SMART growth, not because people aren't smart, but it's that acronym: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. Because growth online or anywhere arguably is one-dimensional when you say it like that, right? I want to grow 20% next year. Okay, how? Well, I'm going to optimize my content online, or I'm going to develop a new innovation online. Okay, well, that's good, but around what kind of growth goal? Is it for new shoppers? Is it for current shoppers to get them to buy more? Is it more trips, right? It's a lot of what IRI and Nielsen used to teach us a long time ago about how to manage a business, but it's actually, there are 12 different growth strategies that you can specifically design your entire go-to-market strategy around, and then arguably get double the incrementality, right? Really get incremental growth. And so those three, I know we could unpack all of those, but I mean, those three are very valuable for brands of any size. And actually, especially for new brands, if new brands knew what big brands can't do easily, they could outpace them even more than they already do without maybe always knowing the why. So there's a lot of cool opportunities for new brands here.
I love that, Chris. And I think that last point that you made with regards to how can we really get specific about the type of growth? Are we trying to get new consumers? Are we trying to get consumers from a specific subsegment? Are we just trying to introduce trial and have more people just try the product, and then we'll focus on kind of new consumers in another way? Or maybe we do trial at one retailer and then our DTC site is focused on really digging in, making sure those folks that are already customers love us even more. I think that's super helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd also love to ask a little bit more. You kind of talked a little bit about there being some things that little brands, or I don't want to call them little brands, let's call them, I think you call them challenger brands, right? So you mentioned that there are some things that challenger brands are able to do that they don't always know that make them more of a competitor when looking at the bigger brands. Can you talk about some of those things? Because, you know, again, the podcast is really for these early stage brands. They might not know what those things are. And I think that it is just as much of a strength to understand some of the opportunities for your competition as it is to know your own strengths. So can you talk about some of the opportunities that some of those bigger brands might have that the smaller brands are able to really kind of capitalize on?
Definitely. And some of this will seem really intuitive, but again, it's smaller/challenger, which to be fair, every brand should be a challenger brand. But challenger brands are often those upstart brands that are in just launching or continue, they're in year 2, 3, 4, they're ramping up. The nice thing with e-commerce is obviously whether it's D2C, social commerce, marketplaces like Amazon, whether you're a third-party seller or use one, or whether you go first party, use one of the Amazon's like accelerator program where you might partner with them to launch a brand. No matter what your route to market is, e-commerce lowers the barrier to entry, meaning that you and I could start a brand tomorrow. We might not be successful overnight, but we have a chance that a big company trying to sell into Walmart might have a little bit of a harder time without one of those incubator paths, right? Like one of those programs that enables challenger brands to enter the market. So e-commerce is that like great democratizer, which is really good. What's interesting though is a lot of challenger brands, what they don't realize is because their only route to market was e-com, they design around the entire e-com process, whereas big companies added e-com as an afterthought, right? So, and I don't mean that in a mean way, because I was at a lot of those companies too. We got really good at it as an afterthought, but it was always an afterthought, whereas for a challenger brand, it's the only thought. So what that enables these challenger brands to do that big brands often can't is be more agile, be faster, be willing to fail. All these things that like business books say are the brilliant basics, they're real. Like fail fast, like in a big company, if you fail, you get let go. Like you look bad, you don't get promoted, right? In a small company, you fail, you learn something, you succeed. Then you end up becoming a multi-million-dollar founder, right? You become a millionaire, right? Everybody hopes to be a millionaire, but it's funny. It's like all the things that everybody says are success factors actually are a lot of times for the smaller organizations because they're designed around it. So as specific examples, and we can get more into this as we talk to today, but content as an example. Content, if it's very compelling, can drive increased conversion. Well, a challenger brand, because their only route to market might be Amazon or an online retailer or their D2C, are going to constantly be fine-tuning content because they're not going to get hindered by, I don't want to say hindered by cost. Cost is a challenge for everybody, but they're not going to say, oh, well, we have to go back and rebrief that through a 3-stage program and have 7 agencies help us. They can go and just like edit the thing, right? When I first started in e-com, even at Reckitt Benckiser, where arguably it wasn't a small company, but we were very lean, mean, fighting machines, we were designing content like there were no agencies doing content. We had our own graphic design company on the professional side helped us, like started doing this for us and could do it really fast and flip things quickly. And we were learning quick, like, hey, this didn't drive, we didn't see any increased growth. Can we try this? And so there was a lot of testing and learning that the words test and learn are used all the time in big CPG. They're not actually implemented all the time in big CPG, whereas literally like a challenger brand's probably testing and learning daily, but not necessarily always calling it that. So like I said, I don't want to speak at too high a level of because we can get really specific, but again, changing content weekly, seasonally, occasionally, trying, potentially launching new innovation or variations of products or bundles or things on the fly to learn, based on research they're getting from the real digital shelf, testing promos and understanding which one gets the most effective lift, and actually being able to, because they don't have everything to lose, they're able to A/B test things until they figure out what the right combo is of 1 + 1 = 3. Whereas in big companies, you can't, there's so much noise going on, you can't actually stop doing everything and unravel just the one thing that drove your growth. So those are just a few of the things. We can dig deeper, but those are just some of the things that help challenger brands win.
No, that's really, really good. I love that. So in talking a little bit about, some of these smaller or earlier stage brands, I know we talked a lot about growth, and we talked about some of the benefits that they have compared to some of these more larger established CPGs. I know that another part of growth strategy that we haven't necessarily touched on is also in terms of the number of items that a brand has in its portfolio. And I know you can talk to a variety of professionals that will have, go for 1 SKU, go for 20 SKUs, stay somewhere between, 6 to 10. Would just kind of love to hear your take on what you think best practices are with regards to SKU count for a new brand. Is there a right number of SKUs? Can you have too many? Can you have too little? And, if you have any other kind of ideas around SKU count and the different ways that you can kind of approach it, would love to just hear your take on that.
You bet. And honestly, that's an awesome question, and it's a loaded question because it is also relative to a number of things, right? If you're launching a new brand as an early founder, right, you might only have 3 SKUs, right? I have this one solution and I had 3 variants, right? 3 colors or 3 scents or 3. And so obviously 3 might be the right thing. I mean, obviously a single digit or a low double digit does automatically sound smaller and slightly more manageable. So you have to start, at the end of the day, the right number might be whatever you actually have to start with, because you don't want to over proliferate overnight before you actually know. You want to make sure you get the practices and the principles right on the ones you start with, so that when you add something incrementally, you know how to actually add that and activate that effectively. But in general, there isn't one right number, right? Because there's large companies that really, to be fair, really only have 10 or 20 hero items that make up most of their business. There are big companies that are managing thousands of SKUs, but to be honest, it's the hero one. So I think there's some element too around hero items, right? Because even in a brand with 50 SKUs, there might be 3 that make up the majority of the sales. Some of that because the brand doesn't know how to activate sales or growth against the other long tail or the non-heroes, but it also might be because some of them are just other sizes that don't do as well online of the same product, or they're uber niche, or they serve a need, but they're not going to ever serve, they're never ever going to be the hero, the mass product, right, that everybody wants. So heroes are another way that brands that have a lot of products actually have to end up prioritizing down to what is a smaller number of SKUs they can actually support. But there are always going to be different scenarios. In thinking about that a little bit, I would say when you start with fewer, you're in a better position to add, because every time you add, it can be because there's an actual gap, or, hey, shoppers said they really wish there was a red color. Okay, well, I did a little bit of research, or we're going to test and learn a little bit and see, and we're going to add a red, right? And we know that adding the red shouldn't necessarily cannibalize all of the blue. I'm just making up, colors, right? But obviously you want to rationalize those ads for true incrementality, and try to do it so that you're A/B testing, so that you don't add 17 SKUs and you don't know which one's actually cannibalized versus truly added incremental needs or missions or wants from the shopper. So I would generally say it's good to review any new items, even when you're starting small, on a quarterly, semi-annual, worst case annual level, but knowing that some innovation takes some time to build. But if you're starting with a lot of SKUs, you're going to want to start focusing on, and this might be based on your budget or your resources, because if you only have one head count, you've got 1,000 SKUs. I mean, I don't know that a new brand is going to start with 1,000 on day one, but it's going to be very hard to manage all of those, all the digital shelves, all the content, all the reviews, all of the promos, and then the media campaign. So, you're always going to have to start with a smaller portfolio, even if you have a bigger one or you plan to add one. But I always look at that more from will this new SKU add an incremental something, right? Will it tap a new shopper, right? Going back to those smart growth goals. The red color will tap 50% of the market who doesn't buy blue. I'm just making up these examples, right? Or when we added that, we saw that 2 SKUs was worth 3x in sales, right? So, and then once you've added them, you're going to want to go back and pare back at different points. Hey, as we added more and more and more, we realized we had an opportunity some of these became less productive. So we actually removed them. So don't be afraid to remove. Big companies are all about rationalizing. Sometimes less about innovation, more about rationalizing. Be okay with constantly rationalizing this portfolio so that the SKUs you keep are either big heroes or incremental niche SKUs, right? That actually add something worth continuing to offer, right? So that's how I'd approach that at a high level. We can dig a little deeper too.
I love a lot of what you said there, Chris. And even as I'm thinking back to my time when I was a buyer and I had about 80% of the assortment that I managed was private label. And so I was, doing some designing myself. And as I'm pulling together my assortment, it is about like what story you're trying to tell. So I might try, and this goes for brands as well. You might be speaking, to your point, a specific consumer. And are you trying to speak just to that consumer? Or do you maybe want to open up and speak to a consumer who is in a variety of maybe say household incomes, right? So maybe you say we're going to have a premier, a prestige, pricing or a prestige line. And then we also have kind of an entry level line. Maybe that doesn't align at all with the brand, right? But you kind of have to layer in all of those things. What is the brand? What are our values and our purposes? And then how do these different items that we have really line up to that? And then how do the new items that we're bringing in or the number of SKUs that we're talking about having help us to, again, gain more customers, gain new customers? How do we know based on insights that this is something that they want? And it's about it all coming together. But I think the big thing that you also said with SKU count that's really important for the brands to kind of put together is that your money, your marketing money can only go so far. And truthfully, I feel like that is the biggest limiting factor when you are an early stage brand and you're talking about the number of SKUs that you have outside of just general inventory and operations, right?
Right.
You still have to actually market the thing. And you got to tell people about it. And if you've got, you said 1,000, but if you've got 20 products,
right,
it can be really hard to tell the difference between all of these different 20 products versus focusing on maybe 3 or even 1, right? And then the other 5, maybe the other 4 or 5 kind of narrate the story.
No, 100%. And I hate to ever say like you're constrained by your budget, but we all are. And that's the point is, what's cool though is if I have 20 SKUs, but I can only really adequately always on and through programming tell the story of the point of market entry products, right? The hero products, right? I might then decide not to add future SKUs until I get those right. But I start making a case for more money, right? Because if I really kill it with 3, then if I already have the 17, I now can make the case like, look what we did with the 3. Imagine we have these other ones that tell a different story. To your point, what if we had enough funding to do that? Or if you didn't have the 17 yet, you're building a case for adding the up to the 17 more because to your point, unless the story is the same story and it's just another color or another size or something in the same portfolio, you have to tell a new story to a different group of people with adequate funding and headcount potentially to manage it or agencies or tools that track it or whatever. And it just becomes unruly. And that's the problem with big brands basically already have this massive amount of stuff they have to manage. The e-com teams often aren't big enough to manage it all easily. A lot of them are getting bigger, but they're not big enough. And they don't have the opportunity to go back from scratch and build from scratch. Whereas a new brand actually gets to start and go, hey, you know what? I added A and it caused a 20% loss. So I removed A and I added B and then I saw a 30% gain, right? It's not perfect. It allows you to actually like building block your way to growth as opposed to like, I have all these blocks and I don't know which ones really stack high. And it's a very different role of starting from the beginning versus trying to like unravel to the beginning. And I think that's what makes new brands obviously so valuable to big brands. They buy them. Often, I don't mean to be mean, big brands usually ruin the little brands, but by disabling them, right? But like unintentionally, right? But they clearly did something that the big brands wanted, which was figure out a real story of growth, focus and prioritize, and only add when incremental. And I think that's a key point. But I did want to throw out one other thought here too with portfolio that you made me think of is if I only sell on Amazon, and whether I'm a first party or a third party seller, then I only have to worry arguably about myself selling. So maybe I only have 3 SKUs. But if I was suddenly allowed to sell at Walmart or I was going to sell through another retailer, I might want to proliferate my SKUs so that I don't have the same SKU that causes that price matching issue, which again, pricing is at the sole discretion of the retailer. But a lot of brands, big brands, are sold everywhere, so they have to worry about this channel conflict. We could prevent that with new brands by actually designing, even under the same brand, a different line for Walmart versus Target versus if you're at that stage of growth, right? And so that's an important part too. Unless you're the seller where you control pricing, we don't want to create channel conflict by just selling the same awesome innovation everywhere. And then when we get to a stagnation of growth, we over promote, we cause price matching, we get unprofitable, and we get delisted, which is what big brands are facing today. So that's just another element of thinking about portfolio growth is how do I differentiate with each key retailer?
That was so good, Chris. And I think I plan on doing a whole entire episode just talking about channel strategy because I think it is that important. And it is one of those things that no one talks to brands about this. And it's one of the things that you can find yourself in a conundrum and it is so hard to get out of. But it's one of those things that it's natural. It's a part of that growth strategy. So we kind of talked about, okay, here's some different ways you can kind of think about growth. We talked about SKU count. And we talked a little bit about launching new products, but we know that that is synonymous with like building a brand, right? And I know I talked a little bit about making sure you have a fit for all of the new items that you have, making sure that it kind of suits or has a purpose rather. Wondering if we can build on that, if you have any additional tips for launching new products, and then also how would you define a successful new product launch? Are there metrics that early stage founders who might not have access to a ton of data can use to say, this is how we know we were successful? I'm hearing a lot about average order volume or AOV recently, but what are some of those things that these founders can use to really say, this is how we know we're on the right growth trajectory, or let's look at this and be fast and nimble like we talked about earlier so that we can course correct and try to make sure we're on the right path?
That's a great question. So from an actions perspective, and some of these, like, again, depending on the level of expertise in this space, I know a lot about this space, but I learn every day and I have to stay humble. And I'm always learning more from fellow Jedi Knights who teach me something new every day. But there's obviously, like, when I say obviously, if it's not obvious, then this is an easy checklist, but there's the brilliant basics, right? For any SKU you sell, new or old or base, especially on the digital shelf, whether it's your D2C, social commerce, or retailer platform, marketplace platform, there is content, right? So we want to maximize our content so that it's complete, it's compliant and correct, obviously to the full legal level of what we can say about our product, but ideally that it's compelling and it really is shopper centric and it's talking to the decision tree. And I was like thinking through that all the content, whether it's above the fold content, like in the carousel of imagery, or it's the enhanced page that you develop, that it tells that story of what is this? Is it for me? Does it work? Why is it better than the alternatives in the category? And then everything else we sell. I see a lot of brands too try to cross-sell like products before you even know that you want the product you have. Like the second image is everything else they have. And you're like, but I don't know that I want you. like great that you have a family. I need to know that I want you first, right? So there's content, right? Availability, right? In stock is like the toss away one. Availability is your number one ability, right? So if you're not available, you can't convert and you won't show up in search. So obviously making sure you're forecasting and ensuring, just in time or real time inventory is really critical. Pricing and value is obviously an important part of doing your competitive research to know, like you were saying, Monique, around prestige line versus an everyday line. Like where do you sit? Are you a compelling offer versus the competition relatively?
I'd love to say one point for that one, Chris. For that in particular, especially as I think about beauty products, I often will advise brands to look at the dollar per volume so that they can see how they match up in comparison to the competition. So if you just take the total cost of your item, so that retail, and then you say divided by whatever the volume is. So if it's 16 ounces, that lets you know the dollars per ounce. And then you compare that to your competition. That gives you a good metric to say, how am I in comparison when all things are the same? And that lets you know. And that's more so important, I think, in the mass retail space. But it makes a huge difference in some cases in terms of selling, because so many brands go out there and they go, oh, we can't sell. And it's like, well, I could have told you that. You're trying to compete with, P&G and Unilever, and you're priced twice as high as them.
Exactly. And I love that point, because the one challenge with an Amazon or a digital shelf on any retailer site is that there's limited merchandising, right? So the problem is, if I'm on your D2C site, you curated that for me. So you might be $1 million SKU. I might buy you because I don't have any other point of comparison. And I always think about even like going to Home Depot or Lowe's. Like, I just remember, it's so funny because I don't cut my own grass, and I'm very happy that I earned enough in my life to have somebody else do that painful chore that I'd never liked doing when I was little, because I used to have to do that for my allowance and I did not enjoy it. But either way, when you go to Home Depot, like the lawnmowers are literally in it's like a trade-up strategy. It's in a line, and I can compromise my way up to the middle one very quickly, because I do want that extra feature for that extra $10 or that extra $30 or whatever it is. So the problem is online, like you're saying, the prestige line is sitting next to the mass line. And so it's not that you have to be their price, but you have to understand that there might be a very visual, perceptive gap between my choices. And obviously through content or other media or whatnot, I'm going to have to make sure I'm helping guide people into why they would choose my more premium one. But you are up against a relativity of value that needs to be considered, even though that doesn't mean you have to lower your price just to lower it. But you've got price and value, you've got availability, you've got content, you've got all the media and paid search, and not to mention social programs that help you get visibility with the community, trial promotions and other things that help jumpstart your brand. And whether you manually audit these or digitally, digital shelf tool, automate, these processes, monitoring these brilliant basics is going to help any product be successful. But there are some things that you can do that I've seen some brands do very effectively, little, seemingly basic things, but sometimes next level. When it comes to reviews, right, generating reviews can be tricky. Some retailers have their own programs, and some brands use like Influencer or their own social community or whatnot to generate reviews. You should definitely do that. But what's actually it may seem like a little silly hack, but like Amazon cracks down on any seller or brand that I would say encourages unusually positive reviews or obviously tries to game the system. But what's really interesting though is Amazon Basics products, I've seen several, have like a tag on them that encourages a review, not a good one, a review. So actually if Amazon can do it, then it's not that they don't let you do it. Because I've heard some brands say, oh, they don't let you do that. No, they do. Just not, you try to incentivize a positive review. They didn't ask for a positive one. They said, leave us a review. So if Amazon can do it, why can't we do it, right? And it's just a matter of putting that in the box or having that as a tag. Or and especially for a brand only organized around Amazon, that should be something you could test and learn from. But the worst you can get is no response from the shopper. But if you have a great product and you asked for a review, you didn't incentivize it, but it might prompt one. So that can be a way to drive reviews. Promos can be very valuable, but I would always say be careful, because if you over promote, then somebody else might buy your product lower, and then either it demeans the value of the product or they might resell you, and then you could get into channel conflict. That's before you even talk about selling to many retailers. Exclusives by retailer could be very valuable, because even if it's under the same brand, a different line of products can give the retailer a reason to lean in with you. If you're at that stage, it depends on where you are as a challenger brand, but if you're part of a network of other brands or you have access to other brands that could complement you, can you pair together, right? I always like to say it's like the Avengers, right? I'm a great brand by myself, but can I join together with other heroes that together we're better, right? If I have my own, I might use them to drive my new one. But if I don't, can I partner with somebody, right? Another small brand. So I have mascara and they have lipstick. I'm just making this up, right? Maybe in the short term, they wouldn't mind partnering with a frenemy in the beauty space, because I'm not really against you, I'm for you, because we could complete the look together. So use the synergies of others, right? Find symbiotic relationships that can help one another, and make sure you're bringing a no catch offer. My last little point is just, I remember as a big brand at Reckitt, at Kellogg's, at Wellness Pet Company, we went to some other companies and we'd say, hey, we've got $100,000 or $50,000. We'd like to do this thing. And we thought it'd be better if we did it together as a solution. The first question from every company was, what's the catch? And you're like, there's no catch. So wait, so you're going to spend money to drive to us? And I said, well, yeah, but I'd like you to put in with me because then we could double it. But there's a benefit to us being with you. So that's the selfish thing for us. But I'm going to spend money to drive to you. It'd be nice if you doubled it though, or you could add something in. Well, usually like double this. So a $250,000 program become a $500,000 program around March Madness or something that was relevant to those categories. Maybe that's a lot of money in the short term for a new brand. But my point is, if you only had 25K, could you partner with somebody else who had another 25K? You both partner together, you test and learn. You probably are going to pay off your ROI, but if it's not amazing, you don't do it again. You find somebody else. But partner with others and find ways to give them value because they'll undoubtedly pay it forward back to you, and you both may win together if you pick the right partner. So there's quite a few things here. Now, I know we did talk about metrics. We can talk about that next, but those are some of the actions I would take.
No, that's so good, Chris. I feel like some of those things that you mentioned, I have not heard the Avengers reference with regards to brands before. I really love that. Like, you're a hero, but, you're just Black Panther or you're just Iron Man. You need a Hulk and a Spider-Man. You need Miss Marvel.
Everyone has their own strength.
Yeah, no. And I think specifically for beauty, I know there typically is, especially as brands think about their arch and how they plan to grow, I think it'd be less likely to probably partner with another direct beauty brand. But I do see beauty brands partnering with other wellness brands. I mean, I've seen brands partner together for, with a stationery brand where they're talking about wellness. And so they're talking about a whole routine, right? So you're saying, I'm going to journal, I'm going to do some skincare, I'm going to take a supplement. And that is like a whole story that you can tell to, again, help you gain a new customer. When we talked about that growth strategy, that's going to be a new way. We're going to talk to folks who might not be current consumers, but we're going to reach them by partnering with these other brands that are going to give us access essentially to their customer base. And we would do the same, right, by having this kind of interchange, if you will. The goal is for all cards to rise, for all of us to gain more consumers by doing some of this partnering together. And then I also loved you just covering some of the basics. When you launch things, you need to make sure you have all the copy ready. You need to make sure you have good images. You need to make sure you're in stock. You have your operations in place. You got a good planner that's going to make sure you have all of those things. So, I think there's definitely some of this that, are the boring basics, but they're really important. But then also some of these other things that can really help make that launch shine and really be a springboard to really, really just crush it.
And what's cool, again, going back to that agility of challenger brands, if you start selling your new brand or your new products through whatever means, right, whether it's the promotions or the partnerships or just I'm on the platform and I've used paid search and I'm starting to get some early traction, not that our challenger brand audience isn't, but look at the reviews, look at the Q&A, right, especially on Amazon. I don't want this to only be an Amazon story, but Amazon has a lot of these capabilities and a lot of people start there because it is the product search engine in the US and Canada, at least today. But the key is, what are they saying about the product, right? Because especially Q&A, the worst thing is I see a lot of Q&A, like, again, real shoppers asking questions. And then unfortunately, a lot of times no one has answered that question in the content, let alone in the actual response. So other consumers offer I want to be very strategic here, invaluable responses. And I mean that in a negative way, right? Like, how big is this pill, like this supplement? It's big. That's the kind of answer you get from most consumers versus the brand would have said, well, actually, it's 3 millimeters long. And so part of that, though, is not just the opportunity to respond to reviews or questions where manufacturers are enabled to do that. It's actually going, hey, a lot of people asked about if this leaves any residue or stains clothes, this beauty product causes, why don't we address that, right? Why don't we actually put that in our content? So a challenger brand could literally see 2 or 3 references to this and go edit the content to see if it worked, right? Does that help? And suddenly, or if you got a bad review because someone didn't understand how to use the product, we added a how-to that we didn't think we had to do, and then we suddenly saw no more negative reviews, right? So once you see a trend or two, and maybe it's 3 or 4 in a statistically significant sample size, edit your content, edit your promo, maybe add a product in the future, but user-generated content, especially on the digital shelf where someone's literally purchasing it, to edit what you've done. Because arguably you're failing fast right there if they don't like it. You might be able to change the content so that they do like it because now they know how to use it. So those are a lot of the actions. I know you mentioned metrics, and there's a couple things. You've got to set thoughtful bottoms-up building blocks. And I know that maybe challenger brands don't worry about this as much, but big brands are like, it's got to be $1 million in 3 months. And you're like, why? And they're like, because that's a legitimate number. And you're like, okay, wow, very scientific. Thank you for that. Whereas a smaller brand is like, okay, I know that on average I get a $2 return on ad spend. And because this is a net new brand, for every dollar I spend, I'm arguably getting $2 in incremental sales. So if I had $50,000, I would get $100,000. Like you can almost build up to your plan, set reasonable but yet ambitious goals, because sales is a lagging metric, right? It's an output that would be a sign of success. But as a new brand though, we might be really focused on reach, right? How many impressions did I get? How many page views on my product page? Yes, I want sales, but how many people are aware of me? Actually, if you get like Amazon data where like branded search index, if you're a non-existent brand, no one's going to search for you. But if you've actually been driving paid search and banner display ads and promo, and you're actually starting to build a little bit of an awareness for your brand, arguably if you said, before we were non-existent, now we're up in this, we're moving up in branded search, that's a sign that you're driving awareness and reach, right? I would say, I think this was in the book called Company of One by Paul Jarvis. It's a book about not just being a one-person entrepreneur, but it's the idea of a lot of companies are all about growth, growth, growth until you explode, whether it's sustainable or not. And there are a lot of companies that try to stay small because they're sustainable, they make everyone a living, everyone's happy, they serve an audience. And one of the principles in there was defining your minimum viable audience. Like, so what is the audience that I need to sell to that would allow me to stay in business long term? That may not be enough for you because you want to grow, but build the building block toward that minimum viable audience. And then obviously then off of that, the rest of it becomes gravy if you're not under the gun to like drive crazy startup growth, right? Everyone wants growth, but sometimes I think growth becomes like a drug and we're not actually figuring out what audience do I really need that would stay consistent, that I could extract more trips and dollars per trip from, that would actually keep me a viable brand in this space. And that might be like the first milestone of success. If you hit that, then you up the ante, right? It was 1,000 shoppers. Then it's 10,000 shoppers. So it's not just, I need 1 million shoppers before I'm legitimate. That's made up. Like that's not a real thing. Back into what would actually sustain your business and then add the next level, or what would it take to double that? And then you can build your plans against that. That's just some of them. I mean, there's affinity metrics too around review count, number of reviews, subscriptions if you have a subscribable product. So there can be a lot of different metrics beyond sales alone that can say whether you're successful at building a brand.
Thanks, Chris. That's really awesome. I think we had an awesome conversation just talking about growth, talking about frameworks that brands can use as they're looking at growth, some of the opportunities, I think, or the benefits, the strengths that some smaller brands have in comparison to some of these bigger, more established brands. We also talked about some specifics in launching new brands. So we talked about SKU count. We talked about how to know things are successful and some of the metrics behind it. As we come to a close, I'd love to just ask you, what additional resources does First Movr offer that can help early stage beauty brands?
Definitely. And I realize every company may be in its own one-to-one situation of like its own nuance. So we're always happy to talk to brands, again, not to sell you anything, just to talk to you. If nothing else, it's always good to have a network of people that can be connectivity points in the industry. But from a free perspective, we offer multiple events per month that are free for anyone to join. You can go to our website at firstmovr.com/events. They're free on purpose to democratize great knowledge. And we have events that focus on, like literally, even this month, we're focusing on Walmart. And we had an event like how to win on the Walmart e-commerce ecosystem, as well as how to win with net new shoppers, how to actually drive strategies and measure net new shoppers. Next month, we have an event focused only on how to win on Amazon and how to win with basket building. We have events on Kroger and Instacart and Target. And events for the Bev Out category. We've had health and beauty focused events before as well on unique strategies. So we do a lot of different virtual events, and anybody that registers gets the recordings and the shareable decks. So even if you can't attend live, we welcome you to come on demand and check out that content. Some of the frameworks we talked about, the change formula, the capability valuescape, SMART strategies, we actually have as available free resources on our website. You can download the frameworks and the guides, and if you have questions, we can answer them. But we do offer paid custom training, certification programs, consulting, if that's something you need. Again, we're not trying to sell you anything. We're just here to help. We just know usually once you know enough, you realize you need a little bit more, and we're here to either point you to somebody who can help you, or we're happy to help you as well.
Awesome. Well, look, Chris, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciated your time and the knowledge that you were able to share with our audience.
Thank you so much for having me, Monique. This was awesome.
Thank you again to Chris from First Movr for joining me on the podcast. We had an awesome conversation talking about growth, and specifically which strategies brands can employ and why they might want to use that strategy to ultimately grow their brand. I also loved hearing about measurable metrics that they can use to measure growth: impressions, sales, affinity metrics, reviews. I hope this was useful, and if so, I encourage you to leave a review, share this with a friend or colleague, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.